I mean, I wrote a book called Architecture in India since 1990. And that is a book which looks at what happens in India after the liberalization of our economy. And I broke the projects that I covered, I broke them into 4 categories. The first was, I called it global practices, which is the architecture of impatient capital, which is, I'm arguing that capital is intrinsically impatient, and the terrains that allow capital to realize its value without any friction are the landscapes of impatient capital. So Dubai is the ultimate landscape of impatient capital, Singapore, Pudong in Shanghai, etc., etc. And so when capital lands in our cities, there are huge resistances all the way from corruption to flawed building practices, etc. But anyway, that is the architecture of global capital. That's all the high-rise office buildings we see in all our cities, correct? And that comes transmitted through email from some office sitting in France or in Germany, and some local architect takes it, bribes the local guys, gets permission to build it, and it gets built, right? Then the second category I said was what I called regional practices, which are architects. I would put myself in that practice, which is, we know what modern architecture is, we know how the world builds, but we are sensitive in some ways to locality and cultural practices and things like that. The third category I put were alternate practices, where it's a completely alternate way of building. I think Nitya Gram isn't part of that. I've covered Laurie Baker, where the means of communication and instruction are much looser. It's more collaborative, where I get a bunch of really good masons who can do granite, and I say, look, let's have this height, this width, this is a plan, this is a division. How do you think we should fix the granite? Should it be poles? Should it be blocks? And we work together and we evolve something. Very few drawings. It's really verbal, etc. And then the fourth category I put was, I called it the resurfacing of the ancient, or counter-modernism, which is, temples like the Akshardham. There's so many temples being built in India which look like they could have been built 5,000 years ago, but are being built now, and it's a huge amount of investment. The Vipassana Pagoda outside Bombay, Bangalore has a number of this. The Hare Krishna mission has built these. They are built as they would be built previously, and they used completely different protocols. The Akshardham temple, it was built by, there were no architects, they were engineers who were the disciples of the sect. They actually identified drought-ridden villages around India. They then made sculpture yards there where they were carving things, and then they used the Toyota just-in-time software to get the temple components in time to Delhi to be built. So it's cutting-edge technology, but very ancient images and intention, right? So I categorize what I was seeing as architecture in India in these 4 categories. And actually what I argue is none of them is better than the other. They all have their value. They all happen simultaneously. The challenge is really for urban design, where in a city, how do you make all that disparity work in some coherent form together? And what is happening in our cities is a cacophony, because everything is happening randomly and there's no coherence. You can't walk down a street in any of our cities and see coherence in terms of facades, architecture. It's suddenly a high-rise building next to a slum, next to a temple, next to something else. It's complete madness.
But what you just described, or advocating for these 4 different ways of building, like you're saying each one has to be proportionately allocated in the city in some sense and sort of coexist.
Yeah, no, what I'm arguing is those 4 categories come from my observation. It's not my proposal. But I'm just saying, if that is what is happening, we have to find a way they can coherently coexist.